Welcome to today's video, where we dive deep into one of the most timeless relationship concepts. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Have you ever wondered why men and women often seem to speak a different language when it comes to love, communication, and emotional needs? Well, you're not alone. In this video, we'll break down the key insights from this classic book by John Gray and explore why these fundamental differences lead to struggles in relationships. If you're looking for better understanding and ways to improve your relationship dynamics, you're in the right place. Let's get started. In relationships, one of the root causes of conflict often lies in the contrasting emotional needs of men and women. These differences aren't just superficial, they are deeply ingrained in how each gender experiences and expresses their emotions. For women, the primary emotional need is often a sense of connection and emotional closeness. Women tend to value intimacy, communication, and emotional support. They seek validation, reassurance, and a partner who is emotionally present and engaged in conversations. When their emotional needs are unmet, they may feel abandoned or misunderstood, even when their partner is physically present. This lack of emotional fulfillment can manifest as frustration, insecurity, or emotional withdrawal, creating a sense of emotional distance that can strain the relationship. Men, on the other hand, typically need to feel respected, admired, and capable. They often place more importance on their independence and may express their love and affection through actions rather than words. Their emotional needs can be less focused on constant communication but rather on having their accomplishments and efforts acknowledged. When men feel disrespected or criticized, especially in a public setting, they may retreat or become defensive. Their emotional withdrawal can often be misinterpreted as a lack of care, leading to further misunderstandings. The failure to recognize these different needs and address them appropriately can lead to significant emotional gaps. For example, a woman may feel that her partner is emotionally distant because he doesn't communicate as much, while a man might feel that his partner is too demanding, always needing to talk about feelings. This mismatch in expectations and emotional needs is often the catalyst for frustration, resentment, and, if left unresolved, relationship breakdown. In healthy relationships, understanding and respecting each other's emotional needs is crucial. When both partners make the effort to learn about these differences and actively meet each other's emotional requirements, relationships can thrive with mutual respect and love. Communication is often considered the cornerstone of any successful relationship, but it is also where many partnerships falter. John Gray's analogy of men as Martians and women as Venusians captures the essence of how differently men and women communicate, leading to frequent misunderstandings and conflict. Martians, representing men, tend to communicate in a more direct and solution-oriented manner. When they speak, it's usually to provide information, solve problems, or express a specific idea. They are often more focused on the facts and tend to avoid emotional expression unless necessary. This style of communication can sometimes make women feel as though their feelings are being dismissed or overlooked. Women may also interpret this directness as coldness or detachment, which can cause emotional friction. Venusians, representing women, communicate differently. For women, conversations are often a way to connect emotionally, share experiences, and seek validation. They tend to express their feelings openly, seeking empathy and understanding from their partners. Women communicate to bond and to receive emotional support, rather than to solve a problem. When their partner, the Martian, does not respond with the emotional validation they expect, they may feel unheard, dismissed, or even uncared for. The misinterpretation of these communication styles can lead to significant misunderstandings. A Martian might hear a woman talking about a problem and assume she wants a solution, rather than simply needing someone to listen and empathize. Conversely, a Venusian might feel rejected when a Martian offers only practical advice instead of emotional reassurance. This disconnect can often result in conflict. A Martian feels frustrated by what seems like an emotional overload, while a Venusian feels neglected and unsupported. Recognizing and respecting these differences in communication styles is key to bridging the gap. A Martian can learn to pause and listen more attentively, offering emotional validation when needed, while a Venusian can learn to express her needs more clearly, avoiding an over-reliance on emotional cues. When couples begin to understand that their partner's communication style is rooted in different emotional needs and cultural conditioning, they can adjust their expectations, communicate more effectively, and reduce the likelihood of conflict. The goal is not to change one another but to enhance the connection by meeting the other person halfway. One of the most common areas of tension in relationships is the delicate balance between togetherness and personal space. John Gray sheds light on this dynamic by highlighting the differing ways men and women perceive and respond to the need for space and independence. For men, the desire for space is often instinctual and deeply rooted in their emotional makeup. When faced with stress or overwhelming emotions, men have a natural tendency to retreat into their cave, a metaphorical place where they can gather their thoughts, process emotions, and recharge. This withdrawal isn't a reflection of disinterest or a lack of love, rather, it's a way for men to regain their sense of control and clarity. In these moments, they may prefer silence, solitude, or engaging in solitary activities that help them regain their emotional balance. However, this need for space can often be misinterpreted by women. Women, who typically view relationships as a source of emotional closeness, may feel rejected or abandoned when their partner retreats. For many women, this withdrawal triggers feelings of insecurity or concern that the relationship is in trouble. Their emotional response is driven by a deeper need for connection and reassurance, which contrasts sharply with a man's desire for solitude during challenging times. For women, the need for space is often more about emotional autonomy than physical distance. While women appreciate the closeness of a relationship, they also need time to themselves to reflect, recharge, and maintain their own sense of identity outside of the relationship. However, when this need for independence arises, it may create tension, especially if it's not well understood by their partner. The misalignment between these needs can easily lead to feelings of frustration and misunderstanding. A man's withdrawal may be seen as an emotional abandonment by a woman, while a woman's request for time alone may feel like a rejection to her partner. If these needs are not communicated openly and effectively, the relationship can suffer from a lack of emotional closeness and increased distance between partners. To maintain a healthy relationship, both partners must recognize that the need for space is not a sign of love lost but a crucial part of emotional health. Understanding that these needs are not mutually exclusive can help reduce the tension. Men can learn to reassure their partners that their need for space is not a reflection of their feelings, while women can appreciate that their partner's desire for solitude is a way of maintaining emotional equilibrium. The key to balancing space and togetherness is communication. Partners should express their needs honestly and make compromises that support each other's emotional health. By recognizing and respecting each other's need for space, couples can cultivate a relationship where both individuals feel fulfilled, supported, and independent. Nietzsche's rejection of absolute truths is intricately tied to his critique of traditional morality. For Nietzsche, morality is not a universal, unchanging set of laws handed down by divine or objective forces. Instead, morality is a human construct, shaped by cultural, historical, and psychological factors. Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality, particularly the Christian moral system, is one of the cornerstones of his philosophy. He argued that moral systems, especially those grounded in religious or metaphysical beliefs, are arbitrary and do not reflect any inherent or universal truths about human nature. In Nietzsche's view, traditional morality, with its emphasis on values like humility, meekness, and self-sacrifice, arose from a slave morality, a moral system created by the oppressed and weak in order to protect themselves from the more powerful, master, class. Master morality, on the other hand, represents the values of strength, power, nobility, and the will to assert oneself. Nietzsche believed that the Christian moral system, which became dominant in the West, was a slave morality that glorified weakness, suffering, and submission, while devaluing strength, vitality, and personal ambition. This master-slave morality framework reflects Nietzsche's broader view that moral values are not objectively true but are shaped by power dynamics and societal structures. According to Nietzsche, the master morality was the product of a small, powerful elite that created values to justify their dominance and to glorify their qualities, such as courage, vitality, and assertiveness. In contrast, the slave morality developed among the weaker, oppressed classes. It was born out of a resentment of the master's strength and power, and it advocated for values that elevated meekness, humility, and submission, often as a way to cope with their powerlessness. This resentment, Nietzsche believed, led to the creation of an entire moral system that celebrated suffering and weakness as virtues while condemning the characteristics that the ruling class upheld as good. One of Nietzsche's key critiques of traditional morality is its otherworldly focus, especially in Christianity. Nietzsche saw Christianity's focus on the afterlife as a denial of life and vitality in the present. Christian morality, with its emphasis on the pursuit of virtue for the sake of eternal salvation, encouraged people to reject worldly pleasures and aspirations in favor of a future that may or may not ever arrive. In Nietzsche's words, Christianity promoted a life-denying morality that was antagonistic to the affirmation of life itself. In his Zarathustra and other works, Nietzsche famously challenges the idea of self-denial and asceticism, urging people to embrace life, passion, and vitality as values in themselves, rather than waiting for some abstract reward in the afterlife. Nietzsche's critique of morality also touches on the role of guilt and ressentiment in shaping ethical systems. He believed that traditional moral systems, particularly Christian morality, were deeply entwined with feelings of guilt, shame, and resentment. The slave morality, for example, emerges from a sense of ressentiment, a bitter, pent-up resentment felt by the weak toward the strong. Rather than confronting their oppressors, the weak internalized their powerlessness, developing a moral framework that devalued strength and celebrated suffering. This, Nietzsche argued, led to a cycle where the weak turned their inferiority into a moral virtue, glorifying submission and passivity as moral ideals. In this way, moral systems became tools for social control, justifying the suffering of the weak and perpetuating a cycle of oppression. Nietzsche also criticized the idea of universal morality that underpinned much of traditional ethical thinking. He rejected the notion that there is a single set of moral laws that applies to all people at all times. For Nietzsche, this idea was not only simplistic but also destructive. It denied the complexity and diversity of human experience, imposing a rigid, one-size-fits-all moral code that stifled individual creativity and personal growth. Instead, Nietzsche advocated for the creation of individualized ethics, where each person develops their own values based on their unique circumstances, desires, and goals. He envisioned a morality that was not about adhering to preordained rules, but about affirming life and the individual's will to power, which could lead to the creation of new values and new ways of living. The heart of Nietzsche's critique is the rejection of moral absolutism. He believed that the traditional moral system, with its rigid rules and universal principles, was ultimately oppressive and stifling to human flourishing. Nietzsche's philosophy calls for a liberation from these inherited moral codes, urging individuals to create their own values rather than follow imposed standards. This is reflected in his famous concept of the Übermensch, or Overman, an individual who transcends traditional moral constraints and creates new values to live by. The Übermensch does not live according to the dictates of external authorities but instead follows their own will and desires, fully embracing life's complexities and challenges. Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality thus has far-reaching implications for both individual freedom and social structures. It challenges the very foundations of conventional ethical systems, encouraging individuals to break free from inherited norms and to embrace a more authentic, life-affirming morality that is in tune with their own inner drives and instincts. It also forces us to confront the power dynamics behind moral systems, highlighting how certain values may be used to justify domination and subjugation, rather than the flourishing of all individuals. Through this critique, Nietzsche pushes us to reconsider not only what we consider good but also why we hold certain values in the first place. Nietzsche's view of knowledge is inextricably linked to his critique of absolute truths. He believed that knowledge, much like truth, is not fixed or permanent but is inherently dynamic and subject to change over time. For Nietzsche, the idea that knowledge can be static or immutable is an illusion, one that serves to prop up traditional systems of power and authority. Instead, Nietzsche saw knowledge as something fluid, constantly shifting and evolving in response to new perspectives, discoveries, and interpretations. One of the central ideas of Nietzsche's philosophy is the notion that truth and knowledge are not objective, universal, or external to human experience. Instead, they are shaped by historical, cultural, and psychological forces. This means that what we understand to be true today may no longer be seen as true tomorrow. In Nietzsche's view, knowledge is not a matter of uncovering a hidden, pre-existing reality, but rather a process of interpretation and reinterpretation, with each new perspective contributing to the unfolding complexity of human understanding. This perspective stands in stark contrast to traditional philosophical and scientific views that treat knowledge as an objective, unchanging entity to be discovered. Nietzsche saw this as a form of metaphysical dogmatism, which seeks to anchor knowledge in something outside of the flux of life. For example, Western science has often treated certain truths, such as the laws of physics, as timeless and universal. Nietzsche would argue that even these truths are interpretations, contingent on the historical and cultural contexts in which they arise. What we consider scientific facts today may, in the future, be overturned or modified by new discoveries or alternative paradigms. Nietzsche's rejection of permanent, fixed knowledge also ties into his critique of scientific objectivity. While science is often held up as the model of objective, neutral knowledge, Nietzsche believed that even scientific knowledge is influenced by the perspectives of those who create it. Scientific theories and paradigms are shaped by the values, assumptions, and biases of the scientists who produce them. In this sense, even scientific knowledge cannot be considered absolutely objective. The history of science is replete with examples where widely accepted truths were later disproven, such as the shift from the geocentric to the heliocentric model of the universe or the transition from Newtonian mechanics to quantum physics. This reflects Nietzsche's view that knowledge is not an unchanging body of facts but a living, evolving process. One of the most profound implications of Nietzsche's view on the fluidity of knowledge is the rejection of absolute certainty. For Nietzsche, knowledge is always tentative, provisional, and subject to change. He believed that human beings should embrace this uncertainty, acknowledging that their understanding of the world is always partial and incomplete. This recognition of the fluidity of knowledge allows for a more humble, open-minded approach to learning and discovery. Instead of clinging to fixed truths or rigid doctrines, individuals are encouraged to remain open to new interpretations and insights that may challenge or expand their current understanding. Furthermore, Nietzsche's view of knowledge as fluid is intimately connected to his concept of the will to power. The will to power is not just about physical dominance or control over others. It is also about the drive to shape one's own reality, to create meaning, and to influence the world according to one's own values. In the context of knowledge, the will to power manifests in the way individuals and societies assert their interpretations of reality and impose them on others. Knowledge is thus not a neutral or passive phenomenon but an active process of shaping and reshaping the world through the lens of individual and collective will. The more a person engages with this process, the more they can contribute to the dynamic development of knowledge. Nietzsche's fluidity of knowledge also has implications for historical understanding. He believed that history itself is subject to interpretation, and that what we consider historical facts are always colored by the perspective of those who write them. History is not a straightforward account of events but a narrative shaped by the biases and values of the historian. Nietzsche's famous idea of the eternal return, the cyclical nature of time and the repetition of events, serves as a metaphor for this understanding of history. Just as knowledge is constantly revisited and reinterpreted, so too is history continuously rewritten, with new insights and perspectives reshaping our understanding of the past. This understanding of knowledge as fluid and relational has a profound impact on fields like ethics, politics, and art. In ethics, for example, Nietzsche's rejection of fixed moral truths means that moral values must be seen as contingent and open to reinterpretation. Instead of relying on universal moral codes, individuals are tasked with creating their own values based on their experiences, desires, and circumstances. This approach encourages greater personal freedom and the exploration of new ways of being, rather than conforming to inherited systems of morality that may no longer be relevant. In politics, Nietzsche's view of the fluidity of knowledge challenges the idea that political ideologies or systems can ever provide definitive, unchanging solutions to social problems. Political structures and ideas are, like knowledge, shaped by historical and cultural forces, and they too are subject to change as new perspectives emerge. Nietzsche's thought encourages us to recognize the temporary and contingent nature of all political systems and to be open to the possibility of change and evolution in response to new challenges. In art, Nietzsche's emphasis on the fluidity of knowledge and interpretation opens the door for creative freedom. Just as knowledge and truth are not fixed, art too can be seen as an evolving form of expression, with no definitive or objective interpretation. Art is a space where meaning is continually constructed and deconstructed, allowing for a multiplicity of viewpoints and experiences to coexist. Nietzsche's idea of the artist-philosopher suggests that creativity is not just about producing works of beauty but about challenging existing norms, pushing the boundaries of thought, and offering new ways of experiencing the world. In summary, Nietzsche's fluidity of knowledge challenges the conventional understanding of knowledge as something stable, fixed, and universal. It encourages a dynamic, ever-evolving engagement with truth, one that is open to new perspectives, reinterpretations, and discoveries. By acknowledging the provisional and subjective nature of knowledge, Nietzsche opens up a space for greater freedom in how we understand the world and how we engage with the ongoing process of learning, meaning-making, and self-overcoming. Nietzsche's rejection of absolute truths is intricately tied to his critique of traditional morality. For Nietzsche, morality is not a universal, unchanging set of laws handed down by divine or objective forces. Instead, morality is a human construct, shaped by cultural, historical, and psychological factors. Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality, particularly the Christian moral system, is one of the cornerstones of his philosophy. He argued that moral systems, especially those grounded in religious or metaphysical beliefs, are arbitrary and do not reflect any inherent or universal truths about human nature. In Nietzsche's view, traditional morality, with its emphasis on values like humility, meekness, and self-sacrifice, arose from a slave morality, a moral system created by the oppressed and weak in order to protect themselves from the more powerful, master, class. Master morality, on the other hand, represents the values of strength, power, nobility, and the will to assert oneself. Nietzsche believed that the Christian moral system, which became dominant in the West, was a slave morality that glorified weakness, suffering, and submission, while devaluing strength, vitality, and personal ambition. This master-slave morality framework reflects Nietzsche's broader view that moral values are not objectively true but are shaped by power dynamics and societal structures. According to Nietzsche, the master morality was the product of a small, powerful elite that created values to justify their dominance and to glorify their qualities, such as courage, vitality, and assertiveness. In contrast, the slave morality developed among the weaker, oppressed classes. It was born out of a resentment of the master's strength and power, and it advocated for values that elevated meekness, humility, and submission, often as a way to cope with their powerlessness. This resentment, Nietzsche believed, led to the creation of an entire moral system that celebrated suffering and weakness as virtues while condemning the characteristics that the ruling class upheld as good. One of Nietzsche's key critiques of traditional morality is its otherworldly focus, especially in Christianity. Nietzsche saw Christianity's focus on the afterlife as a denial of life and vitality in the present. Christian morality, with its emphasis on the pursuit of virtue for the sake of eternal salvation, encouraged people to reject worldly pleasures and aspirations in favor of a future that may or may not ever arrive. In Nietzsche's words, Christianity promoted a life-denying morality that was antagonistic to the affirmation of life itself. In his Zarathustra and other works, Nietzsche famously challenges the idea of self-denial and asceticism, urging people to embrace life, passion, and vitality as values in themselves, rather than waiting for some abstract reward in the afterlife. Nietzsche